Chapter 4. Turning the Dharma Wheel. In life there is suffering. Suffering is caused. Suffering can end. The way to its end is through the practice of discipline, concentration, and wisdom. It might seem pessimistic for the Buddha to say that in life there is much unhappiness. But he did not leave it at that, for, like a good doctor, he diagnosed the fundamental problem of life and declared it. Life involves suffering. Like a good doctor, he wanted to help all beings so that they would attain the understanding that would lead to awakening and thus obtain permanent release from distress. He was not concerned with worldly or spiritual speculation, but with how to help all beings achieve liberation. And like a caring doctor, he optimistically determined that a cure exists and prescribed the requisite treatment as embodied in the Four Noble Truths: right understanding and proper practice. The Four Noble Truths provide the solution to our unhappiness. We need to understand and abandon suffering and its cause, and embrace the proper way of living. This statement is surely one of optimism, not pessimism. Upon hearing that in life there is much suffering, people often say that they do not suffer. We might understand better the meaning of suffering if we think of it as describing life as never being completely satisfactory. We very often feel some degree of physical or mental discomfort. At other times in our lives, we all undergo genuine pain. Initially, we experience the trauma of birth. Later, we encounter disease and illness. Many of us will go through aging, and none of us will escape death. We are all subject to the emotional hardships of pain and grief as we undergo the mental distress of failing to attain what we wish. All too often, we find ourselves having to tolerate the presence of those we dislike or perhaps even hate. And eventually, we will be separated from all those we love. These are all forms of suffering. As Siddhartha had learned, even a king is helpless in the face of aging and death. Regardless of whether we say life entails pain or it is never completely satisfactory, all beings are subject to distress. Simply put, things usually do not go as we wish. For example, we may find ourselves having to move away from those we love. Often at work, we need to interact with or report to people who do not think the same way we do, and thus our workplace becomes a place of antagonism and stress. Or we may have to watch helplessly as those we love must endure an illness for which there is no cure. Our suffering is the disappointment, bitterness, and helplessness we feel. When things do not go as we wish, life is very often unfulfilling, and even if it is not painful, it is certainly unsatisfactory. When we do get what we wish, we find that good times and good things do not last. For example, for those who have not been able to eat their favorite food for a long time, the sudden appearance of it can bring great happiness. Upon seeing the food and detecting its aroma, we will smile in anticipation. The consumption of it brings pleasure as we savor the taste. Memories of the past enjoyment of it come flooding back. Remembering the people we used to share it with brings a feeling of happiness. But what if we overeat? Within our enjoyment lies the seed of distress as we give in to our senses and eat too much. No longer happy, we now feel uncomfortable and may even become ill. Happiness turns into displeasure because happiness contains within it future discontent. And even if we do not overeat, even reasonable eating only temporarily stops our discomfort. Very soon we are hungry again and distressed again. And the loss of our recent happiness becomes another source of distress. Pleasure from any worldly activity inevitably turns into distress whenever it goes beyond the bounds of moderation, whether it is walking, reading, eating that favorite food, or any other interest that we enjoy. When we begin walking, initially it is very enjoyable. But after a certain amount of time, it can become exhausting and painful. After many hours of reading our favorite author's latest book, our eyes become tired. We feel stiff from lack of movement, and we feel the need to move around. Thus, pleasure can in itself become discontent, but a painful experience does not naturally become pleasant. To counteract the pain, one needs to change what one is doing. Suffering is inherent in everything within our existence. Thus, this is the first truth. In life, there is suffering. What is its cause? Ignorance and greed. Ignorance is the lack of understanding that all conditioned things are impermanent and are void of an everlasting individual identity. Greed is the craving and attachment for material things or pleasant experiences or anything else. We probably think that we are not greedy. It is others who have greed. We only have reasonable wishes. If you feel that all your needs are reasonable, please reconsider. Think of one of your most treasured possessions. Picture it in your mind. Now, think of giving it away. What do you feel? If you are like most of us, you will find that it is discomforting to consider giving away a treasured possession. This is attachment. Attachments are our emotional desires for people, pleasures, ideas, and so on. Our attachments, and therefore our cravings, lead us to think that controlling others or having things will make us happy. But so very often, every time we acquire something, its appeal soon fades. We then would like a newer version, or a different color, or a fancier style. This is greed. It is like taking a child to a toy store. The child does everything possible to get his parents to purchase a particular toy. Out of generosity, or more likely frustration, the parent buys the toy for the now happy child. But after only a few days, the toy very often will begin to lose its appeal. And soon, the child loses all interest in it and wants another new toy. As adults, we behave in exactly the same manner, except our toys are more expensive. But the principle is the same. We are rarely satisfied. When we try to find happiness through ideas, possessions, or other people, we will never attain happiness. Because what we want to accumulate are by their very nature transitory and impermanent. Ideas change or go out of favor. Possessions break, get lost, or are taken from us. People die or simply leave us. All of us have greed, desires, and attachments for things, people, life, and more. Why? We are deluded, and in our unawareness, we do not see things as they really are. It is like looking at the reflection of the moon in the water and thinking it is the real moon. We do not see the reality. We do not understand that we are one with the universe. We do not truly understand causality and why things happen. We do not understand that we are drowning in our selfishness and ignorance, or that everything is impermanent and constantly changing. We do not understand that life entails suffering, that it is caused by craving, that suffering can end, and that the way to its end is the path of proper practice. Our lack of understanding is an underlying cause of why we are still unhappy, still discontent. Our lack of awareness blinds us to the truth. It is like being awakened by a strange sound in the night. In our ignorance, we think that it is an intruder and we panic. Upon realizing it is only a branch tapping against a window, we relax. In our ignorance, we do not know what is real. We thought the intruder was real and we panicked, but we were wrong. And if we think that we are individuals and that we have a self, we are again wrong. If we have a self, where is it? Is it in our heart, in our mind, somewhere else in our body? As Buddhists, we believe that there is no independent self. We are interrelated to everything in the universe. Until we realize this through our own experience, we will do everything we can to protect our self, to make our self more comfortable, to keep our self alive longer, all because we do not yet realize that we are all one. We are still deluded, still ignorant. And ignorance gives rise to attachments, cravings, jealousy, bitterness, and more. When our greed is not satiated, we give rise to the heart of anger, of which there are many forms. When we do not get what we want, we become annoyed. When we lose what we have, we become resentful. When we are unable to be with people we like, we become irritated. These are all forms of anger. Anger has its roots in the discriminatory and mistaken idea of I am an individual. As a consequence, we feel the need to protect our ideas and possessions, the need to protect who we are individually. Ignorance leads us to think in terms of gain and loss, of pluses and minuses. And so we feel the need to protect what is ours, whether it is a thing, an idea, or a person. This concept of mine leads to selfishness, which in turn results in our wanting either of what we do not have or more of what we already have. This is greed, and when our greed is not satiated, we feel resentment and anger. When anger remains unchecked, it will intensify into hatred that inevitably grows stronger until killing becomes unavoidable. All because of a flawed concept. All because of I. Greed that is not satiated results in anger. Greed and anger arise because we are ignorant and do not know that craving leads to more craving. This, the Buddha said, is the second truth. Suffering is caused. The Buddha did not just tell us what the problem was, that life entails distress, that our lives are filled with dissatisfaction, that we are unhappy much of the time, and then leave it at that. He went on and explained that this is caused by our greed. This greed comes from our ignorance. And then he told us unequivocally that there is a way to end this suffering. We can do this by eliminating our selfishness. When our greed and attachments no longer exist, suffering ceases and the state of nirvana is attained. Nirvana is the state in which we are permanently liberated from our unhappiness. In this state, there is no thought of me or mine, and there is no more greed, anger, and ignorance. Instead, there is peace, love, wisdom, and a level of complete happiness that we cannot imagine or begin to describe. The Buddha did not tell us about suffering to take the joy out of our lives. He did not intend that we should feel that life was depressing or unbearable or hopeless. He just wanted to shake us out of our complacency. He hoped that we would awaken and replace our current state of ignorance with one of understanding. To deny that suffering exists is pointless, but to become immersed in feelings of hopelessness is equally futile. We need to follow the middle path and find an inner balance, to neither drown in nor ignore distress, but to strive to overcome our unsatisfactory existence. Thus, we now realize the third truth. Suffering can end. The way to its end is the fourth truth, practice. Different traditions and teachers may explain the practice in slightly different ways, but the essence of practice is discipline, concentration, and wisdom.